Well, today we know that a team from the IMF has arrived in town. The team arrived yesterday. Today, negotiations begin, discussions begin. But what exactly do we mean when we say Ghana is going in for a program that will help us with our balance of payments? And really, if there will be any conditions attached, what exactly they may be? Joining me for this conversation is Professor Lord Mensah. He is with the University of Ghana Business School. Good morning, Doc. Thank you for joining the program.
Yeah, good morning, my sister. Good morning to our listeners.
Right, Prof. So there are a lot of people who are hearing all these jargons being thrown around, and really, in simple man's terms, what does it mean when you say, oh, the program we are going for is just to help us with balance of payments? What will such a program entail, and what exactly will the conditions be, if there will be any? What nature will they take?
Well, balance of payment, first of all, as a country, we import and then also we export. And Ghana, looking at our position now, the difference between, the available funds for export and then available funds for import is what we call balance of payment. And Ghana being an import-driven economy, we always need, more buffer, i.e., we'll need more dollars, because whatever transaction you are doing, even across, to Togo, you will use dollars. That is for international transactions. And so effectively, if you are importing more than what you export, then it means that you should have more, buffer of dollars. And when it turns out that your dollar is depleting, it has a long way, to distort, the economy. In a sense that at the point where the demand for the dollar is not there to settle international transactions, you will see the pressure on the exchange rate. And that is why recently we've had our foreign exchange rate, going up. But for going to IMF, obviously, it is an international organization, and it is expected that it's more or less sort of insurance, which we contribute to the fund. So in times of hardship, obviously, the country may fall on the IMF, and especially when you are hard up, because if you look at the options for financing this balance of payment, one of them earlier on used to be our visit to the Eurobond market. But then you realize that, the Eurobond market has become tighter for us because of the downgrade that we recently had. And so government being a rational, should I say rational being, may not, be prepared to go and borrow at that high cost anyway. So therefore, they turn up to be going to the IMF. And so effectively, that is the essence of it. And when you go to the IMF, being an insurance, I normally relate that to having a house and then taking, fire insurance. Obviously, the insurance company may ensure that at least, if for nothing at all, you have fire extinguisher. The same way when the IMF, comes to your environment, you seek rescue from them, and they come to your environment. In order not for you to go back to them regularly, they expect that you put some measures in place. But usually, those measures are, targeting more or less revenue generation and then possibly looking at expenditure cuts. But then what happens is that when they put up these short-term to medium measures, what the fund doesn't do, which this time, I think I'm expecting, a bit, of that in some of the conditions they give us, is how the government, spends. I.e., I'm looking at them targeting certain expenditure lines of the government. So, for instance, if government should reduce the number of ministers, this should be one of the conditions. What I've realized that if you take the recent visits that we've had with them, 2011 and then 2015, they give us all the measures. Introduce these tax lines, ensure that you increase your tax levels with expenditure, make sure that you don't raise your budget deficit above 5%, work within the 5%. All these things are expenditure cut measures. But then they should understand that a country out of these expenditure cuts and revenue enhanced measures is going to generate money. And out of this generation, how do you spend the money? And if you don't put the government on that line, you will get that wastage again. And the visit to IMF is going to be cyclical. And so, for me, they should touch on some of the expenditure lines of the government, and that should be able to go a long way to help us.
Let me just say that we've been joined by Dr. Patrick Assuming, who is an economist with the University of Ghana Business School as well. Doc, thank you for joining us this morning. So there are some who have raised concerns about the fact that we aren't able to grow a lot of homegrown policies to deal with our economic challenges, and we are often too quick to run to the IMF or run for international support. There are those who say we aren't disciplined enough, and that if we could block the leakages and the loopholes, we would be in the capacity to deal with our economic challenges. From where you sit, do we have the right structures to ensure that we achieve that? Because the general sense is that, well, we're going to the IMF now. Once we go, there's a likelihood that we will go again if we do not, develop a homegrown policy to deal with our current situation. From where you sit, how do we have the right structures to be self-reliant when it comes to solving our economic issues?
Okay, so let me start by saying good morning to you and the viewers, and also to my colleague, Prof. Mensah. So I think in terms of whether we have the right structures, I think we've passed some of the best laws and we put some of the structures in place. Look, recently we've had the Fiscal Responsibility Act that will ensure that we put a cap on how much government is, how much government can exceed its revenue, government spending can exceed its revenue. That's the deficit. But you also realize that for Ghana, we should never praise ourselves for having some of the brilliant laws. We've always had problems with implementation. So, the premise of your question, whether we have the homegrown solutions, I think in terms of having the ideas, in terms of what has to be done, it's pretty obvious to me that both the previous government and the current government, there's no question about knowing exactly what has to be done as a country. It's always comes down to whether we will have the discipline to do it. So in terms of the fact that the government has to cut its spending and then raise more revenue, that is well known. And then if you even think about the long-term things that we need to do, which is because Prof. Mensah was explaining to you that if you look at the balance of payment support, it primarily comes from the imbalance between what we import and what we export. So, and both major political parties, when they've been in power, they know ultimately we have to ensure that we are generating more exports and we are diversifying our export base and we are changing what we export from a primary product to manufactured products. So it is known. So usually when we go to the IMF, we always know what is coming, because we know that when we go to the IMF, this is what they stand for. They are going to ask you to do fiscal consolidation, cut government spending, and raise more revenue. And if you recall, even before we went to the IMF program the last time, the 2015 one, we had what we call homegrown solutions. At that time, if you look at what we eventually implemented under the IMF and the homegrown solutions that we had before we went to the IMF, there's not much difference. The only problem is that historically, we haven't shown the discipline and the commitment to stick to the plan. But when we go to the IMF, the investor world out there knows that the IMF, when they are in town, it's like the headmaster who is going to crack the whip and make sure that we are towing the line and following the plan. That is why whenever we go to the IMF, you see that even before the IMF has come to down, some of the indicators start improving. Or, the investor sentiment start changing, because they know that once we go to the IMF is going to ensure that you are following the plan and doing what you have to do. So for me, it's not really a measure of, domestically, we're not having the ideas and the plans. It just comes to the people who are in power and being committed and staying the course and having the discipline not to overspend.
Interesting. So, Prof, what is it for you? What will show that level of commitment, or what will put us on that trajectory to achieving that kind of self-reliance that we want? Yes, there are those who say that, well, there are over 100 countries who are going to the IMF for support. There's global crisis. Ghana is not the only country affected. And there are those who also argue that, yes, Ghana is not the only country affected, but considering where we are and who we are, the resources available to us, we should be able to have a better standing than some of these countries. What will put us on that trajectory?
Well, it has to do with discipline. But let me also state categorically that every country is exposed to, let me say, two different types of shocks. One is domestic shock, economic shocks, and then two, international, shocks. Now, usually, and then we have natural, disaster kind of shocks that most of the time countries are exposed to. But usually, I don't normally measure the performance of an economic manager based on, the local or the domestic, shocks. Those ones are easily managed. And let's assume that we're to have a problem in-house without this international effect. And of course, being an imported economy, we are strongly integrated to the global economy. And so if I'm to ask to judge the performance of government and say, hey, economic management team is doing well, I'm going to judge them based on how they, maneuver within these international shocks. But rather the local one, I won't, measure you up to that, because in the worst case you can print money. In the worst case you can increase, taxes to solve some of the problem. But then the international one that you don't easily have control over, how do you align your policies? You see, I always say that as a country, we need to understand our structural problem. The structural problem by, effectively understanding that when it comes to food, we have problem with it. When it comes to roads, we have problem with it. How do we solve this problem? We had policies that were being run out. As a result of fiscal indiscipline, most of these policies are run, but then we don't realize, the impact that these policies are making to the environment. We keep on boasting of how much we spent on these policies. But then the question is, are they really making impact? No. If you take, for instance, planting for food and jobs, if I were to be the agric minister, my policy will not target exotic food. I will not target lettuce, I will not target cabbage and all those. Basically, typical household in Ghana, we consume maize. A typical household in Ghana consume rice. So if you ask me, this agriculture policy should target only maize, only rice across the country, so that at least, that food will be available. And I'm very sure, economically, if that aspect of, the economy turns out to be cheaper, all other things will be cheaper, relative. So effectively, if you are running out of policy, you have to prioritize it. So for me, it has to do with fiscal indiscipline. And for us to go on that trajectory, like I said, when IMF comes in, they tell us to put up revenue enhanced measures. They tell us to, cut down expenditure. And then, bam, they leave us. Immediately they leave us, as for the expenditure, you've told us to cut it. But then which lines of expenditure do we go into? You realize that, we had IMF, change of government, another government comes, tells you, we are on top speed. I'm on top speed to what? To solve Ghanaian problem. And quickly, put up about 110 ministers, which will all call for expenditure. At the end of the day, we might be spending within the line, within the target, the deficit target that IMF has given us, if for nothing at all, the projected target. But then, those expenditure lines, are they, lines that will build up into revenue generation? Those are the problems I always ask myself. So it has to do with, fiscal discipline, but then IMF should go further to propose certain expenditure lines for us. For instance, if you take the current visit, I would have, loved to see IMF telling us that effectively government should reduce its, size or number of ministers, because they are all, expenditure lines that pull up, the economy. So effectively, they have to go a bit further. and stop that diplomatic touches on economic activities.
Prof, so what you're saying, the IMF makes some prescriptions, worst case scenario, attaches conditions to this particular bailout they're giving Ghana. When the program is ended, when the program is ended, they leave. And then we are back to square one. And that usually is a challenge. So I'm asking about more sustainable measures as a country, as a sovereign nation, what we can do for ourselves to ensure that we don't get back to this point.
You see, we have to hold people responsible. We have to hold people responsible. You know, at the point of exiting the IMF, I remember, you know, a Fiscal Responsibility Act passed, you know, through Parliament. And this act was to keep us in line as expected. And during the COVID, the finance minister went back to the Parliament to review this, you know, act, which is pushing us to spend, you know, within, you know, the IMF lines that they gave us. But then in the end, after the review, we've not back to, you know, bring back, you know, this, you know, act. At the end of the day, if you cause financial, you know, mess or you cause financial loss to the state, how are you punished? How do we make it public? Effectively, if we go out there to, you know, punish people for causing financial loss to the state, whether direct or indirect. Direct or indirect means that there are some people who dip their hands in public coffers. If you are looking for those ones, you won't get them. But then if you want to go indirect, certain decisions that a minister has taken may cause financial loss to the state. How do we punish this minister? Effectively, if we punish the minister and make it public, I think it will go a long way to deter others from doing same. So it's the way it comes to, you know, for losses in the state. So I think we have to go back to the point where we'll crack the whip, where a minister indirectly causes financial loss, not the ministers alone. If you are a spending officer in this economy and you cause financial loss to the state, you need to be punished, and the punishment must be made public. So if your assets are confiscated, it has to be made public. So to me, we shouldn't wait and say, we're going to look at direct a financial loss to the state. The person needs to, you know, divert some money. The person needs to, you know, at the end of the day, make sure that he dips his hands directly into the coffers of the country. No, you won't get them. But then there are some indirect, losses that we are incurring, and those ones must be blocked. And about how do we block them? It's about punishing people and making sure that you make it public.
Prof, and Doc, I'll be coming back to you shortly, but let me just take Doc's thoughts on this. Prof, rather, there have been calls for the finance minister to be sacked. There are some who say that if he would not resign, the president should sack him. But on the front page of the Republic Press this morning, Tarzan is asking that, and that's Dr. Charles Rekubrobi, he is asking that the finance minister is not included in the delegation that will engage the IMF because the finance minister was not for our going to the IMF. Are you in agreement with this? And if the finance minister does not lead the negotiations, then who will then ensure that whatever conditions, whatever decisions that are made concerning this particular bailout will be ensured? Clearly, it doesn't work. Or is it possible? Can it work that way?
Yeah, you know, the economic management is a team. So excluding the finance minister won't change anything. But let me also indicate that the finance minister's posture is the posture of the president. The reason why I'm saying this is that, remember the inaugural speech of the president, he indicated to Ghanaians that he's in a hurry to solve Ghanaian problems. And being in a hurry tells you that you may have to adapt an aggressive posture. An aggressive posture
All right. Sorry, we'll try to reconnect, Prof. But let me come to you, Dr. Assuming there. Your thoughts on that as well. do we say that because of the finance minister's posture about Ghana going to the IMF, he should not be part of the negotiations when he's part of a team that is supposed to ensure that the program is a success eventually when Ghana is able to secure that bailout?
This posture normally challenged, as though the posture, aggressive posture.
Okay, so I'm hearing Prof now. I'm not sure what's happening. Hello? Hello, Dr. Isume.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Prof, I can hear you. Sorry, we lost you, so I moved to Dr. Isume, and I'll come back to you shortly. Doc, if you can hear me, let me take your quick response to the same issue that Prof is dealing with now.
Well, I think the finance minister's posturing doesn't help. I mean, for anybody looking out there, somebody who has vehemently spoken against going to the IMF to go and lead the program and the discussion, people will have the impression that he is probably not committed to the IMF program and so on and so forth. So I think there's a legitimate question to be asked about whether the finance minister should be the one leading our program. But, you know, as long as he is the finance minister, I mean, it's difficult to see us going to an IMF program without him being part. So if the idea is that he should step aside from the IMF discussions, then essentially you are saying that he should be removed as finance minister. But I want to touch on the earlier question you asked about why we keep going to the IMF and whether the IMF will solve, you know, eventually what you have to do to return. I think we need to understand from the outset that there's a disconnect between the real problems of the Ghanaian economy and the solutions we get from the IMF. Okay. The IMF is just going to help us to achieve some short-term economic stability. If you look at what we are going for, think about it. We are going for balance of payment support. And we know where the balance of payment problems come from. They come from importing too much and exporting so little. And yet the solutions that we'll be giving really be to address our fiscal challenges. I mean, there's some aspect of our balance of payment that is influenced by how we manage our economy, the finances. But the root cause is that we have to do something to ensure that we are producing more and exporting more. And then we are doing more import substitution. So some of the things that we are importing that we could be producing locally, we are no longer importing them. So I think when you go to an IMF and people think that the IMF is going to solve our long-term problems, it wouldn't. So if you go and every time we haven't addressed that side of the problem, that side where, you know, we have to be producing more and exporting more, the IMF is not going to help us to be doing that. So let's get that clear at the outset. Then the other thing is about what, you know, the structural problems with government finances, which is also related to what is happening with the domestic production. The IMF, you know, however effective their solution will be, it appears that the Ghanaian economy or our political leaders, we have developed some resistance to the IMF medication. Because it appears that while they are watching,
hello, Prof.
While they are watching, so while the IMF is in town,
yes,
we pretend to be doing what we are supposed to be doing.
Hello, I'm here.
Right, Prof. I was just alerting you to kindly mute because there was some bit of interference there, so we could hear Doc clearly. Yeah.
So I think, you know, we even the fiscal consolidation that the IMF is supposed to help us with. While they are in town, we pretend that we are doing all the right things we should be doing. The moment they leave, we return to our old way. So I think first, you know, the people of Ghana themselves, we have to learn to demand accountability from our government so that when the IMF is not there, they'll still follow and do the things that we expect them to do to keep government books in the balance properly. But ultimately, we have to ensure that the long-term problems, which is the productive capacity, the fact that we are not adding value to our agricultural products enough, and the fact that even for food, things that we should be producing enough for ourselves, we are not producing, those issues have to be addressed. Otherwise, we will return to the IMF even after the current program we are entering.
Indeed, what you say is true, and the information minister did mention that this particular IMF support is not to solve our general economic challenge, and that's why he mentions that there will still need to be more work in terms of revenue mobilization.
IMF has never solved our economic challenge.
Yes, and so and I'm just saying, so he admits, he says that, look, this is just for balance of payment support. We need to do well when it comes to private sector development. We also need to do well when it comes to revenue mobilization. Okay, and so yes, he does admit that we have an issue there. It brings me to the point of the e-levy, because a lot of Ghanaians feel deceived, and because we were told it was going to be either or, and then the e-levy was implemented. And then we're told, well, we're not getting as much as we would want from it, so we're going to the IMF for support. And then government releases a statement and says, well, the finance ministry releases a statement and says, well, despite our decision to go to the IMF, we will still keep implementing the e-levy. There are a lot of Ghanaians who are unhappy with that. And so it's safe to say then that a lot of people will still try to avoid paying the e-levy. At what point do you think government should say, okay, let's just let the e-levy go and find other ways of mobilizing revenue? That's to you, Prof.
Yes, indeed, that's a legitimate question that is expected of the a typical Ghanaian. You know, to say that you opt for the IMF or we go in for the e-levy was more or less a political packaging. Let me put it that way. Clearly, when you engage the IMF, before you even engage them, you should be able to position yourself to the extent by indicating that you are ready for the program. And one of the means of, positioning yourself is to put up certain revenue enhanced measures. To ensure that at least, if for nothing at all, we are in difficulty, but we have started something. So we may need your help to support us to get things, better. So effectively, this government knew very well that we'll go to IMF. And therefore, even if Ghanaians accept the e-levy or not, we will go to IMF and e-levy will not be cancelled. Remember, government has been struggling for revenue generation. And look at how difficult it was for them to introduce this e-levy. It has gone back and forth as a result of this hung parliament over the past 5 months. Remember, e-levy was supposed to start in January, but it couldn't. And then it ended up starting somewhere in May. We have had about 5 months loss in it. So effectively, the difficulty in introducing that tax handle, if government should remove it and then come back, it will be difficult for government. So government, I don't think, is going to remove that e-levy, even if now that we find ourselves with IMF. But let me also tell you that e-levy signals, right, was there clearly. And the indication is that even if the e-levy was to come in place, we will still have gone to IMF. Let's go back to the budget that was read in 2022. Clearly, this administration declared 37 billion Ghana cedis worth of budget deficit. Out of the 37 billion, for the first time, I always say, we normally finance budget deficit 50-50, almost 50-50%, 50% domestic financing, and then almost 50%, what do we call it, international financing. But this time round, government tilted, government foresaw the pressures on the international market for us. So even before the downgrading, so they tilted the financing and they oriented it towards the local market. So out of the 37 billion, we were going to finance 27 billion from the local market. Now let me tell you, so the 27 billion, if government should put up a revenue enhanced measure like, the e-levy, which was, expected to give us around 7 billion, if you deduct that 7 billion from the 27 billion, it will be left with 20 billion to be tapped into from the local market. Clearly, the local market wasn't even favorable. Interest rate, was going up. Inflation was, started going up. And then if you look at exchange rate, it has also started going up. So where do you think government will get the 20 billion financing from? it would have been difficult to get it from the local market. At a point in time, even government tried to raise,
Hello?
target. So, 20 billion would be financed from the international market, and the soft spot is to seek insurance, and that is why IMF came in, and I'm not surprised that we are going to IMF because of all these numbers. So even if the e-levy was to give us a 7 billion, we would have gone to IMF anyway. And so I'm telling Ghanaians that government would not remove the e-levy, and for sure e-levy is one of the trump card on the table to engage the IMF. So I don't think government is going to remove it.
Yeah, in fact, we've received a communication from the finance ministry to that effect. So amidst all of this, there are demands by teacher unions and other worker unions for government to give them a cost of living allowance. So they say, well, we're also struggling. Inflation is high. Things are getting expensive by the day. We aren't paid enough. We need some cushioning. Some have said this is not the right time.
Well, I think for now, it should be the right time because with the e-levy, right, government should be able to maneuver through some of these difficulties because we've been to, such IMF engagement without any tax handle. And then after the engagement that we started introducing, these tax handles. But for this one, we are lucky at least. There has been implementation of the e-levy, and I believe that if government, sit down clearly and look at the, effective way of implementing the e-levy, it should be able to maneuver its way through these difficulties at the labor front.
So, Doctor, if I get you right, you're saying that money accrued from the e-levy could be used to handle these allowances that the
part of it should be able to be used for some of these difficulties, solve these problems.
Prof, I'll come to wrap up with you shortly, but we've been joined by Isaac Donko, I beg your pardon. He's chairman of the Senior Staff Association of Universities of Ghana. So grateful to have you here this morning. You're also demanding cost of living allowance. Is it pegged at 20% of your take home? Hello? Hello, Mr. Donko. Kindly unmute your device, sir.
Is that okay?
Yes, I can hear you now.
That's good.
So,
good morning.
Good morning to you, sir. Did you get my question, please?
Come again with your question, please.
Okay, so I was asking, we've heard from the teacher unions, they want 20% of their salary as cost of living allowance. You're also demanding some allowances. Is yours also pegged at 20% of your salary?
Yes, before I answer your question, let me take the opportunity to extend my greetings to your listeners and viewers, as well as my members across Ghana in all public universities in Ghana. Yes, it is true that senior staff of public universities in Ghana, living conditions are now deteriorating. We cannot go to the market. We cannot go to the pump stations. We can't pay our children's school fees. Our hospital bills are nothing to write home about. For that reason, we are asking the state, for that matter, the government, to cushion us by way of giving us COLA, that is 20%. So you are right, we are demanding for 20% COLA to cushion our living conditions.
So, I mean, we heard from Nat Tewu prior to the government's decision to go to IMF. Are you one of those who is just cashing in on government's decision to go to the IMF to throw in your demands?
No, we are not cashing in. The Money Union, that is organized labor, and GEC, on 1st May, made such appeal to the states that the living conditions in Ghana is not good at the moment. So government should help the states or the workers by way of giving them COLA. So we are not just cashing in, but we are telling the government that we are suffering. What they gave us last year, that's 7%, is not good enough. So they should top it up.
And so we know that teachers are on strike. Schools across the country have been closed. Are you threatening a strike as well?
Yes, we're giving them ultimatum up to next week Wednesday. If nothing is heard from government, we are also going to lay down our tools.
Have you started any proper negotiations? Are you talking to any representatives of government, the employment minister? Has there been any official communication or sit down?
We've done what we can do, and it's up to them to invite us for a meeting. So we are waiting for them.
So you've written officially?
That's why you're giving them. Yes, you've written to them. You are waiting for their invitations. If they extend it to us, we will go and sit down with them. If they don't, we are going to advise ourselves.
So tell us your association, Senior Staff Association, Universities of Ghana, what exactly do you do? What does your membership comprise of?
We are mostly administrators of public universities, IT persons in public universities, hospital staff, that's the nurses, fire services, all the non-teaching staff in the public universities are members of Senior Staff Association.
Thank you very much for joining the program. Isaac Donko, he's chairman, Senior Staff Association in Universities of Ghana. I just brought him in because of that COLA aspect we were talking with Professor Lord Mensah. So, Prof, clearly we know there's a global crisis. We were hit by the pandemic. I mean, nobody denies that. But would you say that we wouldn't be here if we had managed our economy better? Or could we have managed our economy better such that the external shocks wouldn't have been felt as much as we're feeling it now?
You mean, does this question come to me?
Yes, it comes to you, Prof. Yes.
Right. Clearly, yes, indeed. If we were to implement most of the policies outlined in this administration's manifesto to the latter, even if we were to go to IMF, it wouldn't have been as quick as we've had it now. One of the policies that I think is not yielding and that has taken us to IMF is planting for food and jobs. If planting for food and jobs was to produce as expected, we would have had control over food inflation, and that would have built up in controlling other indicators when it comes to this economy. And so for me, it's about how we failed in getting some of the output on the expenditure lines that we were putting up. Because, like I indicated earlier, this administration has been aggressive, and the posture has been aggressive all this while. The expenditure has been all out, but then the corresponding revenue generation that is expected of it are not forthcoming for the past 5 years. And I tell you that if we were, because that would have solved the structural problems that we have, and one of the main structural problems is how we are not able to keep our foreign reserves, because at the end of the day, if you produce and your importation goes down, your foreign reserves will be kept as it's supposed to be. And so for me, I think it has to do with failure in policies that are that were rolled out by the administration.
Would you say this government was over-ambitious?
Yeah, the government has been over-ambitious. I mean, if you look at the expenditure lines, and that has been the posture of the president all this while. He indicated that he's in a hurry to solve the problems of Ghanaians by establishing even about, I think, 7 ministries. We had Ministry for Monitoring and Evaluation. Corruption was still ongoing. We have ministries that are supposed to provide some basic amenities, agriculture facilities to to work, but then they were not, working as expected. So for me, it has to do with the way we spent our way through, and that is what has brought us this far.
Finally, and wrapping up with you, what are you looking forward to as our engagements with the IMF begin? You've mentioned some of the conditions that you hope to see, which includes cutting down the size of government. But besides that, what would you like to see also in terms of what government puts on the table in being able to secure this particular bailout?
Yeah, of course. We're going to have several benefits. Some of them are going to be soft, they're going to be, hard. But then in the end, I'm expecting government to be disciplined. We shouldn't, take the IMF as an advantage to leverage on the IMF engagement to borrow more. And I can see people are jumping because our yields on the market have started coming down. And so we think that would be an opportunity to go and borrow more. That would have even escalated our problem. I believe that engagement with IMF is good. It's going to put us on a temporary, situation to soften, the situation on the ground. But then it shouldn't give us that kind of leverage, which will push us to borrow more. The conditionalities that IMF will give us, in a way, they're telling us that cut your coat according to your size. So whether we have IMF or we don't have IMF, as a poor country like Ghana, we should be conserved and stop the aggressive posturing when it comes to the budget that we put out there. And so effectively, those are the things I may want to see, going forward.
I appreciate your time here this morning. Professor Lord Mensah is with the University of Ghana Business School, and we've been talking about government engagement with the IMF and all the other strings attached. We also had Isaac Donko, who is chairman of the Senior Staff Association Universities of Ghana, speaking to us about their demands for the cost of living allowance. And we also had Dr. Esuming, who is also with the University of Ghana Business School.